Greetings collectors and welcome to today's retro game review. You joined today for part 2 of the Alone in the Dark mini-series. During this series we'll be revisiting the original Alone in the Dark trilogy as well as the spin-off game Jack in the Dark, The New Nightmare, and we'll also be taking a shorter look at the more recent attempts to reboot the franchise. We left last time having looked at the original disc-based Alone in the Dark for the PC, a game that helped begin the survival horror genre as we know it today, and it also showed that physical box presentation was still very much alive. Today we're going to have a look at the next standalone game in the series, Alone in the Dark 2. But before we do, I'd like to quickly cover the Alone in the Dark entry that often seems to be forgotten in retrospectives, Jack in the Dark. For the early adopters of Alone in the Dark, the first pressing came with this original artwork and disc-only formats. However, there was a release which you can think of as either version 2 or the 1.5 release. This came on CD, the shiny new darling of media formats. In 1992, the Pentium chip was gaining hold, and the introduction of the CD drive on PCs was becoming more standard. For this reason, a specific CD-based release of Alone in the Dark 1 made a lot of sense. However, we had already run out and bought the floppy disk version of the game, so Infogrames would have to sweeten the deal for us to adopt the CD edition. This spawned the promotional Halloween/Christmas spin-off game Jack in the Dark, packed into the 1.5 release as a taster of the CD technology and a decent sampler to get us all interested in the scheduled 1993 release of the true sequel. Jack in the Dark is beatable in under 10 minutes if you know what you're doing. It features a child visiting a toy shop to rescue Santa from a group of demonic toys. For what it is, it's very charming. The darkness of the first game is mostly absent here in favour of a more slapstick approach as the child gets the stray toys under control. The game doesn't contribute much to the series' narrative, although it does have a cameo of a Jack-in-a-Box called One-Eyed Jack. It's definitely worth a playthrough if you can find a copy. This brings us on to the Alone in the Dark 2 full retail release. 1992 had kick-started the series and the sequel was very much anticipated. As you can see from the cover, the reviews were rather spectacular. 94% from CVG, 95% from Sky One's Games World, 9 out of 10 from PC Review, and 97% from PC Zone, their highest rated game ever. So, as you might imagine, gamers were flocking to the stores to get hold of this game. Upon initial release for the PC, the game was simply titled Alone in the Dark 2, with the tagline, "A New Virtual Mystery" starring Edward Carnby. However, the 1996 re-release in Europe titles this one as Alone in the Dark Jack is Back, and can be found on the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn. In the US, this title would be further changed to Alone in the Dark, One-Eyed Jack's Revenge. It's fair to say that both 32-bit editions look much better than the PC edition after their reworking. Added narration and cutscenes really add a different feel to the game. The PC edition is very much in line with the first game, lots of polygons and some very awkward controls. This time around, the plot is very much more of a mystery, and it's hard to justify Alone in the Dark 2 as a true horror game. Action mystery just seems much more fitting, as there is a lack of any real gothic horror so prevalent in the first game. The story is very much around rescuing a girl called Grace from gangsters and pirates, and does not necessarily sit well against the first game. The puzzle elements of the game are as strong as ever, and the game is arguably more ambitious in terms of setting and story arc. However, I feel that the game was a bit of a misstep in the series. What worked well in the first was the slow, methodical nature of solving puzzles to progress. There were of course enemies to fight, but this element of the game was always the weakest due to the control system. However, Alone in the Dark 2 seems to focus in on the need to fight various enemies. This really doesn't play well to the strengths of the mystery elements, instead focusing on the rather creaky combat system. It's a shame, because if done well, they basically would have created a pirate edition of Resident Evil. Instead, we get a game that's a bit of a mission to play at times. That's not to say that the game isn't enjoyable. There's plenty here to enjoy once you get past the incredibly punishing opening sequences with the garden guards. Edward Carnby's role of the supernatural private eye comes into play well throughout the game, and this is the real link between parts 1 and 2 of the series. Overall, the game isn't quite perhaps what fans were expecting, and received mixed reviews from magazines of the day. The original PC edition is often cited with favourable reviews though. However, the PlayStation version released in 1996 was launched after the first Resident Evil game, making it instantly inferior, which is a shame because this is where Alone in the Dark's descent really begins. Tragic irony, as the game series it did so much to influence ultimately became more well known with younger generations of gamer. The good news though for collectors is the physical release. As with the first game, Alone in the Dark 2 certainly doesn't disappoint. So let's address the elephant in the room, which is the magazine feedback of the day. Basically 9 out of 10 being the lowest score, and these were from bona fide PC magazines of the day. Whilst I'm slightly down on Alone in the Dark 2, it's because I have the luxury of hindsight. The graphics and execution for the day, although they have not dated well, were cutting edge at the time. The size of the game and general scope was very ambitious. I also personally wanted Alone in the Dark 2 to be a pure horror experience, similar to the first entry. However, that wasn't the plan. The series is pitched as a mystery series, not horror. Once you come to terms with these facts, then the ratings all begin to make a little more sense. After all, as much as we all tell ourselves that Alone in the Dark helped found the survival horror genre, it also helped found this type of mystery adventure too. Before Alone in the Dark, horror mystery was very much confined to text adventure and point and click games if you were lucky. The physical box gives some great insights into the game marketing at the time, boasting 50 hours of gameplay, 70 characters, 210 backgrounds, 600 3D objects, and 1,500 animations. This indeed was a monster of a game. Also, check out those required PC specs. 2 MB of RAM, VGA 256 colours, and 14 MB hard disk. Interestingly, you don't even need a Pentium processor to run this game, simply a 386 or 486 processor. This blows my mind when you see how far we've come and how talented programmers of the day were to create such a rich experience with so little resource. When I collected this game some years ago, I also opted for the 9-disc edition. Because, well, I've always been a bit of a fan of these things. CD-ROMs were still a bit like witchcraft to me back then. For full collecting disclosure, this is technically the second pressing of Alone in the Dark 2, printed in 1994, as it contains the on-front ratings. The original has the exact same content though. So, what do you get inside? Well, you get a rather well-constructed box and, oh geez, there's those 9 floppy disks. 1.44 MB of high-density goodness. Then, the rest of the good stuff. A rather nicely laminated manual with all of the usual instructions. A registration card which you can post back to France if you wish. The 1993 Infograms collection brochure, interestingly still plugging Alone in the Dark Part 1, and coupons for the free demo discs. However, it's the last 3 items in the box that are perhaps the most intriguing. There's a very interesting form to send back for a hint book. Fill in your name on a declaration and post back for a hint book for just £3 British. The lamp logo over time became synonymous with the series and appears in many places over the course of the series. The other half of the card though is really fascinating. It invites you to become a godfather to a friend. Simply add your name and a friend's name and Infograms will send out 2 decks of Alone in the Dark playing cards. I particularly like the address, Infograms Limited, Detective Department. These little touches really go above and beyond to make Alone in the Dark's world feel more real and blurs the lines of reality with our own. Also, how desperately does everyone want those decks of cards now? As with the original of the trilogy though, the star of the show has to be the Mystery Examiner, Christmas issue 1924. This newspaper gets you right in the mood with tales of kidnapping, references to the original Mansion case, adverts for in-game health potions, and subtle hints as to the game's subplots. Quite frankly, this is a most brilliant piece of gaming history. It neatly ties the game together and develops backstory into some of the off-screen parts of the world. Also, a rather enticing advert to Blow Big Holes in Criminals advert. Modern publishers, take note, this is how you create immersion. Last but certainly not least is the card deck. As far as a poker hand goes, it's not great, but what they will do is allow you to read the security code to get you into the game. With piracy all the rage in gaming, Alone in the Dark had some real fun here with the fans. Simply hold up the correct card up to the text and get the right code. What's more, the box fits very well alongside the rest of the trilogy. So, Alone in the Dark 2, worth collecting? Whilst not as influential as the original, you certainly get a lot for your money here. You get a challenging pirate-based mystery adventure, and for any trilogy completionist, it goes without saying that the physical edition is a real treat. Back in 1993, this game was the talk of the town. In a more modern setting, it looks rather dated, plays a bit wooden, and there's so much more that came later in mystery adventure gaming to explore. For a pure nostalgic hit though, I'd still recommend Alone in the Dark 2, for those curious to learn about the earlier days of the horror mystery genre. With decent sales of parts 1 and 2, Alone in the Dark would see its next release in 1994, the imaginatively titled Alone in the Dark 3. This would of course be the last of the original trilogy, but with an aging engine and competition from the 32-bit console market creeping in, how would it fare? Find out in the next episode for Ghosts and Cowboys as I finally ditch those floppy disks in favour of this newfangled storage system known as the compact disc.